Hi and welcome back to a new video and also a new video series. If I just think back the past 20 years, there are a lot of items and products that come into my mind that never made it to the market or only made it to the market for a very short time. That could be caused by bad decisions in product development or also spontaneous changes on the market. But since some engineers and people already spent their time making and developing these products, I thought it would be nice to at least dedicate a video series to items that never really made it to the market or only made it to the market for a very short time period. Upgrade to the Ultra class with the EX63 dedicated server from Hetzner. Powered by the Intel Core Ultra 7 processor 265 with 20 cores, it's the ideal all-rounder. 12 efficient E-cores handle background tasks, while 8 powerful P-cores take on demanding workloads with ease. In benchmarks, the EX63 ranks between the AX102 and the AX52 in terms of performance. As one of Germany's major internet service providers, Hetzner delivers its own data centers, high-performance servers, storage solutions and more. If you want performance, efficiency and scalable flexibility, choose the EX63, starting from €78.54 per month. Find all information in the description below. We will start with this very small item, which is this tiny chip on a small blue band. This thing is called Intel VROC. VROC stands for Virtual RAID on CPU, so the possibility to run RAID configuration over the CPU itself. This technology, or specifically this product, was launched in 2017, and I would say this is the prime example of an item that was made in the prime time of Intel, at a time where Intel was doing really well, and a time when they made a lot of terrible decisions that also led to where Intel is today. This is one of the prime examples that I would call dead on arrival caused by very bad decisions. Traditionally, there were two ways to create a RAID array. So if you wanted to connect or combine multiple disks to, for example, increase capacity or increase speed, you would create a RAID array. And you could do that over hardware RAID. So hardware RAID would be a controller like a PCIe card that you would put into your motherboard. Then you would hook up the cards directly to the RAID controller and then, for example, have RAID 5 or RAID 10. The second way, much easier, much cheaper, but usually also much slower, is so-called software RAID, where you can just create your RAID array inside Windows or like Linux over software. And then Intel thought there is also a third way that is kind of an in-between solution, because you don't need a hardware controller, a hardware acceleration for a RAID controller, because the CPU can do exactly the same thing. So you would create your RAID through the CPU and use the CPU as your hardware RAID controller. And that's how Intel VROC was born. The technology itself was shown 2017 in combination with the launch of Skylake X, so the X299 platform or chipset, which is this motherboard, where you would insert a Skylake X CPU in this socket. And this would be our small Intel VROC key, so just a small dongle with a blue band attached to it. And typically somewhere here in the bottom area of the motherboard, you would have the counterpart. On this motherboard, it was this small socket right here. And you would just insert it exactly this way. The problem though was that Intel VROC was not a great feature. It was basically a license key. So it was more like something to slow you down, because if you would not purchase a VROC key, you were only allowed to run RAID 0. If you wanted to go for something different like RAID 1 or RAID 5, you would have to purchase one of these VROC keys, which were available in different versions. And these VROC keys were super expensive. For example, the RAID 1 key cost already $100 and the RAID 5 key about $300. So that already led to a lot of negative comments when this technology was announced. But it was even better when Intel decided that you can't use this with all SSDs, but you can only use it with Intel SSDs. And at that time, nobody was really using Intel SSDs in the consumer market, or at least not many people. And they were also not the best when it comes to performance, and they were also not the cheapest, which led to a lot of very negative comments. A couple of months after the launch, Intel decided to remove the SSD limitations. You could also use other vendors, but at that time it was already too late. People already hated VROC and nobody really wanted to adapt to it. And that's how this technology was dead on arrival, and I think it was also absolutely deserved. If you're building a PC, one of the components that didn't change much over the years is the PSU. So you just have your one cable that goes to your outlet on the wall, and then on the other side, you typically these days, at least on high-end PSUs, you have modular cables. So you select which kind of cables you need for like CPU power, motherboard, peripherals, and also the GPU. And in 2019, Seasonic thought they would change how this system is approached to, at least in their mind, make it simpler with Seasonic Connect. And this Seasonic Connect system always consists of two parts. So we have a PSU, and we also have this, what you could call adapter or like power plane maybe. And other than the PSU I just showed you, this one is not modular. It only has one cable, or basically two, that exit the PSU. It's the bigger one and the smaller one, and they both go into this Seasonic Connect thing. On this Seasonic Connect adapter, you would have the connection on the bottom that goes to the PSU, so big one and small one. And this is also the orientation how it was mounted or meant to be mounted inside the case. So just imagine the backside of your system. Your PSU would sit somewhere down here, and then you would have some, I don't know, cable comms or like just small cutouts in your case where you would reach to the front for like PCIe power and the motherboard, for example. And then on top right, somewhere here, you would probably have a cutout to just run your cables for CPU power supply, as you can see here. So you would have CPU power supply, some peripherals on the right side, and then on the left side, more peripherals, PCIe, and also the motherboard power. The idea was simply to have this sitting directly behind the motherboard tray and thus reduce the cable length, for example, to your motherboard, or also extra devices such as the GPU or also the CPU power supply. And Seasonic also said that this would reduce the voltage drop because the cables are shorter. And while this is true in theory, I think practically it would not make a difference at all. And something I also have to highlight is that this is not simply just an adapter, because you can also see if you look inside that there are some DC-DC things going on inside here. If I remember correctly, it was that 12 volt and 5 volts are being done in the PSU in the main part, and then 12 volt to 3.3 volt was done inside the Seasonic Connect. So it's not simply just an adapter, but it's basically taking out one of the parts from the PSU and transferring this into an extra device. But it quickly became clear that this will probably not make it to the mass market, at least in broader use. And that was mainly also due to the case market that was drastically changing in the years of like 2018 to 2020. Because if you think about it, a normal classic PSU is an ATX part, right? It's an ATX standard, so it would fit in every ATX case, whereas this is a specialized item. And you would have to make sure that it fits in your case. It sometimes may fit very difficult. You might have to align it weird, or it might not fit at all inside your case, especially if you're talking about a smaller case with less space behind your motherboard tray, or also with a smaller height. Especially to the classic approach with just modular cables, there was not a big advantage using this. And after going through a couple of reviews online for both professional reviews, but also like Amazon reviews, I could figure out that most people disliked the cable length of the main PSU. You have to think about, you would probably just have your PSU sitting like this, or like that inside most of the cases. And then the cable is just not very long. And it seems like the cable length also often limited the use of the Seasonic Connect adapter. So in some cases it was maybe compatible using this, but then the cable seemed to be not long enough to make use of this. So that was something that people criticized. And another thing is obviously the price. Because of having a secondary device, it would always be more expensive than just having a traditional normal PSU that is simply one part. The Seasonic Connect came also to the market at a difficult time, about 2020, that it was close to 12 volt high power, which was missing on this. So it was straight not compatible to the newer GPUs. And I think that's just my personal opinion, that the choice of the PSU type was also maybe not correct. This is quite experimental, in my opinion. And experimental stuff and special stuff is often cool for enthusiasts. But enthusiasts would not get a 750 watt gold certified PSU. If this was maybe 1000 or 1200 watts and platinum certified or something like this, maybe more people would have bought it. But like this, I don't think many people bought it, and that's why we probably don't see it anymore on the market. When we are talking about GPU interfaces these days, we usually mean PCI Express, so the connector between your GPU and the motherboard. But in the early 2000s, that was different. It was not PCI Express, it was AGP. This AGP, which meant accelerated graphics port that you have on the bottom of this GPU, was available in different standards. So not only different bandwidths and speeds, but also physically different, which is different to what we see these days with PCI Express, where you have maybe different lengths for different bandwidths and speeds, but they are usually all compatible. And the most advanced out of these AGP ports was the AGP Pro 50 and Pro 110. And Pro 50 is on this card, and if you would have it sitting right next to a normal AGP, you would straight see that they are physically a lot different, especially in length. This is a 3D Labs Wildcat 4 7110 dual GPU graphics card from the early 2000s. 3D Labs was a GPU vendor. They made GPUs for professional use, mainly workstations, until about 2006, same as this one. And that was also the reason why they went for the AGP Pro slot that was mainly used in workstation applications. So again, if you compare it, the Pro slot to the normal AGP slot of this ATI Rage card, then you can see how physically they are different. AGP is different to PCI Express in a lot of ways, not only physically when it comes to the connector, but also that, for example, PCIe is working with duplex, while this was only half duplex. So you could only read half the speed when you're receiving data from the GPU to the motherboard or CPU, whereas you could send data at full speed to the card. That was mainly because these things were GPUs and meant for display output, whereas PCI Express is a more universal standard that can read and write or transfer and receive data at the same speed. In the max configuration, AGP 3.0 X8, this had a bandwidth of 2.1 GB per second. While the 2.1 GB per second were enough for most of the even workstation cards at that time, it often was limited to power delivery. So most of these AGP cards, they had a power draw of maybe 25 watts. But especially these bigger ones with like dual GPUs and a lot of memory, they needed more power. And that's how AGP Pro was born. So there's AGP Pro 50, which is 50 watts, and Pro 110, which is a max of 110 watts. You know, these days the GPU vendor would pick a weird power cable that might not be reliable. Back in the days, at least, it was reliable, but it was maybe also not a smart choice because there were not many devices that would support it, may it be GPUs or the motherboards. And that was also at a time where AGP was already confusing because you had different slots, you had different standards, you had 1.5 volt, 3.3 volt, and then adding another one that just has more power was just leading to more confusion. AGP Pro 50 and Pro 100 were kind of like transfer technologies because it was in a time where it was transferred to PCIe. And PCIe was much more common, and it was also easier to use, also in terms of that it was directly supplying a max of 75 watts just through the connector itself. And at that time, when PCIe devices were more common, external power connectors were also more common, starting with those typical 4-pin Molex connectors on GPUs and then also going over to 6-pin and 8-pin power supplies. So this connector was no more needed. So these were three technologies that hardly made it to the market and did not last very long on the market itself. And I still have a huge list of other technologies I want to talk about. I hope you enjoyed this video format, video content. Leave some comments down below of what you think about it. Thanks for tuning in. See you next time. Bye bye.